Do you know a single successful person who has no stress or anxiety?
We're obsessed with trying to feel happy and feel good all the time. And we feel like there's something wrong if we're not, right? And how is that actually hurting or helping people in your opinion?
But that's what creates grit and resilience and all of the positive psychology aspects of being a human.
Without those hard days, without the hard times, we wouldn't appreciate the good days and the good times.
You know, we've gotten away from all of this. Our education system isn't doing this. Our medical system is doing a terrible job.
The medical industry is not doing people any favors by overprescribing, in my opinion.
If you told me that 5% of the population had an anxiety disorder, I would say that's a high number. But the numbers being thrown around are 20, 25, 30, 40, 50%. I mean, these at a certain point, you got to wonder, is this really debilitating conditions, or is this part of the human spirit and experience?
What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Vacation Rental Revolution podcast. I'm your host, Shawn Moore, and we're back with our Experts Corner. Every Friday, we have interviews with experts in a lot of different avenues of not just real estate, but life in general. And I'm really excited about the conversation we're about to have today. I've got an expert in dealing with anxiety. And so I've got Dr. David Rosmarin. He is an associate professor at the Harvard Medical School, a program director at the McLean Hospital, and founder of the Center for Anxiety, which has served over 10,000 clients in multiple states. In his most recent book, which I highly recommend, is Thriving with Anxiety, 9 Tools to Make Your Anxiety Work for You. And he's been on multiple TED Talk stages. And so, Dr. David Rosmarin, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me on your show.
I'm so excited about this conversation. Like you were talking before we hit record, this is, we typically work with a lot of investors, high income earners, dealing with a lot of different things, and stress is just a regular part of life, right? And I love your approach to stress and anxiety and dealing with anxiety. And, and obviously your background and your resume speaks for itself, but give me a little bit of a background of what led you to this point in life before we dive really into the details of dealing with anxiety.
Sure. During the COVID pandemic, I realized a couple things. One, as a clinician, I'm never going to put out that fire. And number two, in many cases, the fire is going to burn no matter what a person does, because anxiety is a human emotion that all beings experience. And we tend to pathologize all of it, all the way down to those 1 or 2 out of 10s. And it's not advantageous. So I think we have to reset the balance. And that's the perspective that I'm coming from.
Yeah, I love it. And I love... dive into like when we like you take the approach of like, one, we're never going to, you can't avoid stress and anxiety, right? We're just going to have it. We're really built for it. And I think I loved when I listened to the way that your approach to this is, when I listened to some of your talks and I was going through some of the things that how to handle anxiety. But your approach is, let's just handle it head on. Like, let's just really dive in and say, here's how we're going to address this instead of avoiding it. I think we live in a society where we're obsessed with trying to feel happy and feel good all the time. Sure. And we feel like there's something wrong if we're not, right? And how is that actually hurting or helping people in your opinion?
Yeah, pathologizing normal distress is what keeps a lot of my colleagues in business. And I think it's to the detriment of our society. If you think about it, do you know a single successful person who has no stress or anxiety?
No, you don't.
I mean, you have a pretty successful listenership. The people listening to this podcast today, they're investors, property owners, a lot of them are physicians. You've been through stress and you've been through difficult times, and that's what gives you an edge. The fact that you've faced it and mounted it, gone forward through those difficult periods. You never know when you're making an investment in a property how things are going to turn out. There are ups and downs in the market, and that's actually what gives people the opportunity to do well. I mean, even Warren Buffett said this in a completely different context than economics, right? Yeah. When people are fearful, get greedy. I mean, anxiety is an opportunity, literally a fiscal opportunity. But beyond finances, I think once we reset the balance and expect hope in many ways that anxiety and stress are going to be part of the picture, everything turns on its head.
Yeah. I love it. It's funny. I think that, Instagram and everything knows when you're having certain conversations, because today, one of the first memes I saw on Instagram, it said, if you want to feel good today, pick something hard and finish it.
It's great advice.
It goes right into what you're saying. It's saying, hey, listen, you're gonna, that happiness and everything else is not trying to avoid the hard things. It's not trying to avoid the things that are going to stress us out, but it's being able to say, hey, listen, I'm going to walk toward that fire and I'm going to deal with it. And then I'm going to feel even better about myself because I conquered that demon, or I conquered whatever was really stressing me out.
Sure. And we have to calibrate it, right? We're not, walking towards, firstly, a genuinely dangerous situation. That would be fear. And we're not going to do that. We're also not going to walk towards like a 9 or an 8 out of 10. But a 5 or a 6, yeah, once a week, do something really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
There are lots of I was just reading something this morning about how in the Wall Street Journal about CEOs waking up at 4 a.m. being a ritual, having a cold plunge every single day before hitting the office, before doing something. That's uncomfortable. It's not fun, but that's what creates grit and resilience and all of the positive psychology aspects of being a human. We've gotten away from all of this. Our education system isn't doing this. Our medical system is doing a terrible job. We're putting out the fire left, right, and center. We're not giving people courage and strength and connection, right? What really fuels well-being in the world. And, like I said before, COVID really just hit it all home for me. I realized in 2020, 2021, that, in many ways, our approach to anxiety is just all wrong.
Yeah.
And we got to pivot.
Yeah, I'd love, and before we go much further, because I heard you, both of the talks that I've heard you give kind of an asterisk on the very beginning and saying, hey, listen, if anxiety is really affecting your life and you really do need help, there are places that you do need to get medical advice and seek the advice of professionals,
sure.
right? And you talk about clinical versus non-clinical anxiety. Can you because I had never really thought of it that way. Can you kind of explain the difference between what that is and what we're really talking about there?
Sure. First, I'll explain the conundrum. When it comes to sadness, all human beings have experienced sadness, but we actually have a different word when we talk about the medical condition or something that needs clinical work, which is called
clinical anxiety, right?
Depression, clinical depression. And we bifurcate in the language between sadness and depression.
Yeah.
When it comes to anxiety, we don't do that. We use the same word. I feel anxious at a 1, 2, or a 3, or I have an anxiety disorder at a 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10. And we use the same exact language. And the truth is, anxiety is always uncomfortable. And It's always something you want to get rid of. The time to use clinical treatments, whether that's pharmacology, medication, or whether that's psychotherapy, or whether that's something more intensive, is when it's interfering with your life. Not when it's uncomfortable, because it's always going to be uncomfortable. Yeah. You're never going to want to feel anxious. That's the nature of the symptoms. But when it's interfering with your life, if you can't go to school, can't go to work, can't get out of bed, can't function, can't do what you need to do, then for sure we're talking clinical. And hey, I've done plenty of that for the last 25 years.
Right. So
as a professional.
And I might, you may or may not want to go down this rabbit hole with me. So I'll keep it either a deep hole or a not a very deep hole. But okay. I think we agree on the medical industry is not doing people any favors by overprescribing, in my opinion, and 100%. Immediately trying to say, here's the easy button, here's the fix. Like whether it's, pharmaceuticals, whether it's, all the different anti-depression, anti-anxiety medications. I believe that stuff is way overdone, way overprescribed. And I think that by, knowing that there's a need for some of that, I think you acknowledge that. But I believe that they're way too soon to prescribe it instead of trying to do some of the things you were talking about in your books.
Let's talk numbers. I mean, 100 million prescriptions of benzodiazepines are filled by U.S. pharmacies on an annual basis. That's a shocking number. Yeah. Now, if you told me that 5% of the population had an anxiety disorder, I would say that's a high number. But the numbers being thrown around are 20, 25, 30, 40, 50%. I mean, these at a certain point, you got to wonder, is this really debilitating conditions, or is this part of the human spirit and experience that we feel anxious, we feel stressed, and we become allergic to those low levels of symptoms, which actually makes it worse. That in of itself, our expectation for an anxiety-free life, that's what drives us nuts. And by the way, I went through this experience myself. I mean, as an anxiety expert, you don't think I've had anxiety? As somebody who's, started a clinic in New York City and Boston, which was, has treated, like you mentioned, 10,000 patients alongside an academic career. If I didn't have stress and anxiety, I'd be crazy. Something would be wrong with me.
Yeah.
But it took a couple of years for that to actually settle in and for me to embrace this, as opposed to immediately seeing all forms of anxiety as a disease, a disorder, a problem, something that has to be reduced in order for me to live a happy life, a happy and fulfilling life. I just don't think that's true anymore.
No, I don't either. And it's that old, kind of the cliche of without those hard days, without the hard times, we wouldn't appreciate the good days and the good times. Sure. Right. And it's a range of emotions, which is normal. And I think that's where we've tried to make it sound in, online and everything else that, it's not normal to be stressed. It's not normal. Like something's wrong if you're not living this perfect life all the time. And it's okay to be sad. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to be anxious. It's okay to be happy. It's okay to have that. Like, that's how we're built. Right. And I think that's what you're saying.
I would go a step further. If you don't feel anxious at all, then I'm really worried.
Right.
Something's very wrong.
Something's wrong. Now we're sitting in your chair at the office and you're trying to figure out what's going on in my head. Right.
Yeah. No, yeah. The truth is, people who've come into my office and they have zero anxiety are actually the worst cases. Usually there's a substance abuse problem, alcohol, they're narcissistic. They won't acknowledge anything. Maybe it's severe neurodevelopmental disorders, and they don't even know how to articulate it. I mean, you're talking about something that's way worse than anxiety, which is normal.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's talk about tactically. Like,
Sure.
Everybody feels anxious. Everybody feels stressed out. And we're, depending on what it is for the day, like maybe maybe you have to give a presentation and you don't like to be in front of people. Maybe, you have to have a conversation with your boss and you don't want to have that, whatever it may be, or an employee. How should people mentally prepare knowing they have to have, there's going to be something that's tough that day, and they're going to maybe have a conversation and do something that they're uncomfortable with. I know that you talk about certain steps to be able to do that, but how do you tell people to kind of mentally prepare for that?
Yeah, I'll take you through the 4 steps. I think it's really my best tactic. We'll throw in the caveat one more time. If it's interfering with your ability to function, then you should get some professional support. But if you're just distressed by it and it's upsetting and you're having a rough day, that's like, good morning. That's called life. So assuming we're in that category, there's 4 steps. The first is to identify, what are you afraid might happen in that conversation with boss, in that presentation, in that business deal that you're about to execute. What are you afraid of? What's giving you those jitters? And to actually think about it. Often the emotions are so upsetting. We feel like we shouldn't feel this way. We don't want to feel anxious. So we put it out of our mind. We put it out of our heart. We try to get distance from it. We immediately, like you said, go to medication, even if it's a normal feeling that we're expected and was positive for us to experience. And none of that's helpful. Take the time, take a mental inventory, go for a long walk, think about it. And you can journal it. You can, whatever it is, get clear what exactly it is that you're afraid of. Mm-hmm. So that's step 1. Step 2, talk about it with someone. It doesn't have to be on your Instagram or Facebook or whatever feed. It doesn't have to be a public conversation. If you're a private person, no problem. But you got to have someone. Yeah. You can call me up. Tell me what you're anxious about. I know people can call you too. Share it with a loved one, with anyone. It doesn't matter, but get it off your chest with someone who's going to listen and understand and reflect and be validating in some way. So you got to share how you feel. Okay. 1 and 2. Any questions so far?
No. So identify, share, right?
Identify and share. Number 3, embrace. And we've been talking a lot about this. You seem to, sort of resonate with you, which is doing things that make you feel uncomfortable intentionally in order to build muscle tone. Yeah. You go to the gym, you're going to sweat. You're uncomfortable. You're, building your physical fitness. You're building your mental fitness. You're building your emotional fitness. And facing anxiety does the same thing to your mind. That's how we do it. I wish that in every school in the United States, that kids were encouraged every week to do one thing that makes them feel uncomfortable. Yeah. One thing that makes them feel a little bit of anxiety. It would take care of, I don't know, just like you have physical education, you need to have mental education. And this is what it should look like. A physical and mental workout, doing something that makes you feel uncomfortable, raising your hand in class, looking into a property in an area you're not clear about, I don't know, having that conversation with, that property manager who's a little bit off the rails, whatever it is having a conversation with someone else who you feel a little bit awkward about, doing something that gives you a bit of panicky sensations, just doing something that makes you feel uncomfortable and pushing through it. So that's embrace. Ready for number 4?
I'm ready for number 4. I'm ready.
Let go, man. Just let go.
Nice.
Because there's limits of our control. You can make the best decisions. You could be the brightest person. You could have the most financial resources. And at the end of the day, there are limits. I'm not saying you can't influence it. I'm not saying we have no agency. We do. And I'm not saying you shouldn't make good choices. You should. But there's limits to that control. And when we let go, moments of anxiety and stress actually become exhilarating. Instead of holding on and being like, I don't want to feel this way. It's more like okay, this is beyond my pay grade and I'm all right.
Yeah.
And that letting go is really key. It's been the hardest one for me. I'll just add anecdotally and autobiographically. But yeah, identify, share, embrace, let go. Those are the steps.
Yeah, I think letting go, especially for a lot of our listeners, is probably one of the hardest steps because, a lot of them are type A control freaks. They're like, hey, listen, I've got to control everything. I've got to have I've got to influence the outcome of everything. And you mentioned in one of the talks I was listening to had the serenity prayer, how it mentions, grant me the ability to accept the things I cannot change. Right. And it's being able to say, hey, listen, I'm going to do everything I can to, like you said, there's things that we can do, there's things that we can't do, but there's a point where you just have to say, okay, I've done my part, what happens, and I'm going to let it go.
And often great things happen when we let go.
Right.
As someone, I'm in the Harvard Medical School system. It's a fairly discerning department. I have to perform in terms of my academic writings, my publications, grants. And then in addition to that, having a center, having patients and staff who are under me, like it's a lot. But one thing I've learned very clearly, and I'm thankful that I learned this early, but still, even to this day, I grapple with it, is that despite having, resources at your fingertips, so many things can come out of left field.
Yeah.
It's just, and then often the best things in the world come out of left field. Like I remember when I launched my book, I had a publicist. We were working. She was, reaching out to all sorts of places. And then at one point, she was trying to pitch me for Good Morning America. She gave up. She's like, you know what? This just isn't happening. Let's move on to the next thing. That afternoon, she got a phone call.
That's awesome. It's just, where you just finally are like, okay, you sometimes just want to, push so hard and you're just like, okay, I pushed hard enough. And then you walk away and you're like, okay, it happens. We had fertility issues for a long time. My wife and I dealt with for 8 years. We ended up having twins through in vitro fertilization, but we were part of groups with other couples having fertility issues. And there were times where they said, we can't do it anymore. And they just kind of let go, they give up. And before you know it, we get a call that they're pregnant, right? And it's like, there's so much stress and there's so much anxiety and there's so much that they're going through. Finally, they just kind of say, okay, we can't do anymore. And it happens. And so I think there is definitely something to be said. That's totally different example of that. But that's what it made me think about when you're talking about that.
And there's actually a psychological mechanism that's known. I have some colleagues at the Mind Body Institute, the Benson Henry Mind Body Institute here at Mass General Hospital within the Harvard system. And I've spoken to them. They have a fertility program for mind body. And often when people let go, it actually has a physiological effect and increases the chances of them getting pregnant because they have less cortisol circulating throughout the body and other sort of direct physiological effects. So there's something to be said, and I also, there's having a spiritual perspective myself, and you mentioned the serenity prayer. There's that piece, but I think also as well, just psychologically, that letting go is so critical that you can actually channel the anxiety in constructive ways as opposed to letting it get the better of you.
Yeah, I love it. So you mentioned you wished that, kids in school were taught was one thing. And I love going there as parent. I've got twins they're going to be 14 in a couple weeks.
Oh, wow.
And they're actually homeschooled. And so my wife homeschools them, and we're always looking at different things in curriculum. And one of the things that we always ask them when we talk about the day and we pray about the day, but at the end of the prayer, we always ask, what did you do that was hard today? What did you, and we've kind of, for us, that's kind of our way of, and it kind of made me think of what you mentioned for kids. I wish that school is taught, but it's kind of figuring out, and we've always asked our kids, what did you do that was hard for you? What did you do that you didn't want to do today? And there's always something. And when they're little, it's something super simple. Well, I cleaned up my bed, or I made my bed. I didn't want to do that. Now, the older they get, that muscle, like you said, it's just kind of developing that muscle where they know they have to kind of look for something hard to do. And I feel like they're building that skill set of trying to figure out, hey, when, going and doing things that are not that fun, and they get to be more and more complex, and sometimes they're still simple, right? But it's like when you go to the gym and you start to run, and somebody wants to run a marathon. They can't run 26 miles the first time they go out for a run. Usually they build the skill, they build the muscles, they build the endurance to be able to do that. And before they know it, they're like, okay, I'm pretty much doing this. And so I think that I guess my question is long-winded, indirect way of asking it is, I'd love to hear you expand a little bit more on what you'd like to see, or what we could do as parents for kids to get them to start building this type of muscle.
Yeah. Firstly, it sounds like you're doing it just intuitively, but I want to harp on one piece. It's not forcing kids to do things that are hard. It's getting them to want to do things that are hard. And it sounds like that's what you're doing, by the way, what you and your wife are doing, because you're inculcating this value. What did you do? And, I want to do something else. And they're sort of leaning in that direction. Mm-hmm. So I think once you get the bug to do things that are tough and that are going to build your muscle capacity, it's kind of like working out. Like people who do that, they're like, I want to work out. It's not comfortable. I feel sweaty. I'm a big mess afterwards. I'm winded, and I'm, I have, it even hurts, and like I feel the muscle burn. But you enjoy doing it because you know that it's going somewhere. Mentally, we don't do that at all in our society. It's like a lost art to do things that are mentally and emotionally hard. We're always sort of chasing happiness. We're really chasing happiness and equanimity and peace at the expense of our mental health, ironically.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think intuitively for me growing up, like I'm one of those like guys that I feel like everything has to be perfect. If I don't accomplish something, I feel like a failure, like if it didn't work out. And for our kids, I noticed with my son particularly, he would stop trying on stuff because he wanted it to be perfect. He felt like if I wasn't going to win, I don't want to do it. Right. And I'm nervous. And so we really tried to consciously say, hey, listen, we want them to want to try to do hard things. Just like you said, not force them to do it, but want to try things. And so we would reward the effort to go do something that was probably not going to be great the first time they tried it. Right.
That's great.
And so but I did it more because for me, that's something I've always struggled with, is saying, hey, listen, do I really want to try that? Because I don't want to fail. I don't want to look bad in the eyes of whoever's looking up to me or watching me or whatever. Right. And so I've tried to get over that. And then you try to, as a parent, you always want, you want to pass that baton to your kid, and you want them to run farther than you've ever ran. And so you're always trying to say, okay, what could I do different? How could I teach this? And rather than always reward the wins and the first places and everything else, it's like, hey, listen, the first time you try something, you're not going to be great at it, but go attempt it. And, the attempt and going and trying something new is what we really tried to reward, so that it would encourage them to try different things on a regular basis.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Like escape rooms are, a good way where you're going to fail. You're going to, hopefully it's going to be really challenging. There's another, there are a number of sort of things like that are in the culture, but they're few and far between. They're really, usually we focus only on things that we are reasonably confident we're going to be successful at. And I love that. Failing forward is one of the concepts.
Yeah, exactly. I love
fail
it. I've
quickly,
heard that before.
do something beyond your skill level, fail forward, and then learn.
Yeah. Awesome. How can, like obviously as parents, we have some influence over our kids. We want to have some influence over what we do, right? We want to lead by example. Sure. Are there any, we went through the 4 steps to really kind of, deal with stress and anxiety, but are there any things that do you try every single day to do very specific things to just make it part of the routine?
With my kids?
You personally, or with your kids?
Yeah, I'll talk about with my kids. So the identify one is really where it all starts from,
Okay.
especially when we're dealing with someone else. Often, little, Jimmy or Johnny or Jenny comes home and they're feeling anxious, and mom or dad's like, is everything okay?
Yeah.
And the immediate role is one of, I have to take care of this child and
Fix
stop them from feeling anxious because something bad is going to happen. And it sends the message that anxiety is a problem, that anxiety is a disorder in of itself, as opposed to just asking the question like, what happened, sweetie? Is everything okay? Which is an identify question. And then it helps them to share. So you can actually do both first and second step in one, as long as you're not freaked out by your kid's anxiety.
Yeah.
But the moment you have that like startle response, you interrupt that process, the normal healthy process of simply having your child share their emotions with you and identifying what they are, which is just a basic task that we all have to do, regardless of how old we are.
Love it. Are you a fan of, like, how often do you want the kid to solve their own problem? Like I think as a parent, we naturally want to fix the situation. Oh, you're stressed. Well, tell me what happened and I'm going to go fix it. And my wife especially has a real natural tendency to just jump in and say, I'm going to fix this problem. Right.
Sure.
And I'm always, kind of like, hey, we'll find a solution to the problem. But now the older I get, the more I'm like, let them kind of figure it out. Let them try to deal with it. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that. Cause I think as a parent, you naturally want to go in and like, just grab your kids and protect them and solve their problems. Right.
Yeah. I think especially in the United States, in Western culture rather, it depends on what the problem is. Sometimes kids are dealing with some pretty serious stuff. Like they could be getting like bullied, like seriously bullied at school. They could be dealing with drug use. They could be dealing with all sorts of stuff that they probably are going to need professional or at least parental guidance and help and support. And that scaffolding is important. So I think it's a bit of a more nuanced question. Does your child have the capacity to do this? And it might not be right away. It could be that they'll fail and struggle with it for a week. And what are the consequences going to be of that if you sort of let the chips fall where they may? But to your point, I do think it's important with some reasonable cadence to allow kids to find their own inner strength to face the world and not to do everything for them. So it's always a balance, but it sounds like you and your wife are coming from different perspectives, which is great.
Yeah, and I think it's whatever your natural tendency is. And I totally agree with you. It depends on the problem, right? There are some problems you're like, hey, listen, we're going to figure this out together. We're going to get involved because depending on the severity of the problem. But it's also like when we're like in the business, like I'm like, hey, if there's a problem, we want to solve the problem, but come to me with the problem and then come to me with 2 or 3 solutions to the problem as well.
Yeah, that's a good way to do it. I'll tell you one more thing, which is that often parents are more nervous. And this is Jonathan Haidt's one of his major points in his book, The Anxious Generation, which, by the way, if you haven't seen, you got to take a look at that book. Is that parents are often very protective of children in the physical world and not protective enough in the digital world.
Interesting. Yeah.
Right. Because in the digital world, there are some very serious concerns that loom large and that they're insidious and you don't have control over them. And just today, was it in the Washington Post about finally, I think there's some movement in Washington about deep fake pornography and what's been happening with teenage girls and crazy stuff that you would never want happening to a family member. But then what's really going to happen with them if they go to the supermarket on their own, if they take an Uber, at 3 a.m, crazy area, but there's a lot more dangers that lurk online than there are in the physical world. And I think we have to reset that balance. So that's just a general comment that I'll make on this.
I love do you have an opinion on how much the digital world it contributes to stress and anxiety and should we limit it? Like what's an opinion on that?
Yeah, there's no question that, for example, if you can wait until high school to give your kids a smartphone, do it. Not everybody can, sometimes it's so ostracizing and so difficult, but then you got to put limits on it, which is also, then it's a battle. This is like the parenting concern of the modern age and the modern day. Then there's our own use and modeling healthy use. And,
Yeah.
how are we not distracted during mealtime, during family time, during, when we're getting, buzzes and dings and bells and whistles. And, this is very much a modern issue. But yeah, I mean, without some sort of these devices, I'll put it this way: the devices are created in a way that they're supposed to be incessant and always in your life and always sucking you in. That's what they're designed to do. That's literally all the software, all the apps. They're calling for your attention. So unless you have some limits on that, it's just going to take you down.
Yeah. I totally agree. And I think that
pretty basic.
Guys our age, like, we didn't grow up with it, right? And so we're trying to navigate how to deal with it as parents, because our kids are all growing up with it. Yet we're still, we're still scrolling all the time. And so I think the jury's still out on the effect. I think it's coming.
Jonathan Haidt makes a pretty compelling case that it's had a causal effect. So I'll encourage you to take a look at that book, The Anxious Generation. It's not good. It's definitely, there's definitely been some, the data's not put it this way, Mark Zuckerberg's going to have what to answer to.
Yeah. It's and I'll definitely go get that book. I think that it would be fascinating for me to read. I'm always interested in that. We're anti-device at our house, probably to the detriment of my kids don't know how to use half of the devices.
Oh, wow.
And so to the point where we're very much like, hey, check the phone at the door, and nobody uses phones in the house. Like, we have a phone box, literally, that when you walk in the door, you put a phone in there. They don't have smart devices. They've just got a flip phone stuff. So it's, we can get hold of them, but it's not, but they're kind of the weirdos with their friends, because
that's the issue.
So we're like, we did get them an iPad for Christmas. And so we're like, well, they're almost 14. They don't even really know how to use all this stuff. So we better figure out how to do it.
They'll figure it out.
They'll figure it out quick. Yeah, they do. But definitely limited in our house. So I'll have to check out that book. So,
okay.
This conversation, I love these conversations, and you and I could, if you would sit with me for a few hours, I would love to pick your brain on this stuff. But it's always, this stuff is always fascinating for me, and a lot of good stuff to share. Before I end, I always like to ask if we could go back and you could, all the stuff you've learned, all the number, the thousands of people you've talked to and seen, and you could just take from the experience of today and go back to your younger self. Would you give yourself any certain piece of advice that would stand out?
Firstly, a lot of advice. But with regards to anxiety, our topic du jour, I would tell my 18 or 19-year-old self that having anxiety is something, it's really an opportunity. It's a very human thing. And it's something that most of all, in many ways, is an opportunity to connect with others. Because when you identify what's going on and share it with someone, that actually creates closeness. It can create emotional closeness. And that's a tool that I really have learned only to use in the last 5 years, maybe 10 years of my life. And it's had such a massive impact, and something I wish I had learned sooner. I've got plenty more to advise myself, but that's definitely one thing I would say.
I love it. And I love the advice. I appreciate you sharing that. And I really appreciate this conversation. I know, your time is valuable. And I think that this is, especially today, this is stuff that we could definitely learn more and dive more into. Where can they get more of Dr. David Rosmarin? Sure.
Visit my website, dhrosmarin.com, DHROSMARIN.com. And then all sorts of LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn quite a bit. I post fairly regularly. So I'd love to hear from listeners, what they thought of this conversation and my other posts. Reach out.
Link to the book. Will the book be on there?
Sure. Yeah. Thriving with Anxiety, 9 Tools to Make Your Anxiety Work for You. Yeah. And I also have some workshops that I've been doing, which are available for the public, on how to use these 4 steps to thrive with anxiety, not to get rid of your anxiety, but to actually use it in a constructive way. And it's broken down into 4 modules based on those 4 steps. So that's something your listeners can avail themselves to on my website.
Awesome.
And like I said, love to hear from people.
Yeah, awesome. And guys, you guys that listen to the show, we will link all of those, the websites, the books, everything else, everywhere you can go, workshops, wherever it is in the show notes. So you can always click it in the show notes, wherever you're watching or listening on. And those of you listening, we know how valuable your time is. And we appreciate you spending it with us as part of these great conversations. I know you guys enjoy them as much as I do because we get that feedback. And so if you like the show, we don't run ads or sponsorships. So the only ask we ask of you guys is to share the show. Those things help us. If you have more than 30 seconds, like it or review it on whatever podcast or platform you're watching or listening on, whether it's YouTube or your favorite podcast station. And the final, most important thing I ask you guys at the end of every episode, pick that one thing you can do today, start building that life you don't want to take a vacation from. Cheers, my friends.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Vacation Rental Revolution podcast. Share this with other people you think need to hear about it. And don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. Hey Grace, is there a website? Yes! For more amazing content and expert advice, visit Vodyssey.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.